All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to RC with Adam. And specifically, I want to welcome you. Your name is probably like Jafar or possibly Philip. But either way, I want to welcome you specifically to this podcast. It's the RC with Adam podcast. And so today I'm going to be riffing on, this is going to be a great podcast to listen to if you just want like a big picture of drones and RC stuff and like what does it take to get involved, kind of like how much does it cost, what are some of the things to think about and that go into that. And I'm just going to be kind of riffing on that. But first, I want to tell you that today is Tuesday. And it's actually a stormy day, so I got to wrap this up before the power goes out. And it's Tuesday, and that means that I didn't put this podcast out and do it on Friday like I normally do, or like how I usually think in my head that how I would normally do it. And so you could say that that makes me a terrible person. You could say that I'm just always late. I never get things done on time. And why even bother trying to do it again? Because I'm, messed up so much trying to get it out there and I couldn't, and I had all this other stuff going on, or I had a bad day and I didn't get it done, and I was just, whatever, because I'm stupid. You could say that. I could say that. Sometimes I want to say that. But we shouldn't say that. We shouldn't talk that way about ourselves. If you wouldn't talk that way about your friend, or maybe somebody that you just, maybe just a random stranger, because you're not like a rude person, don't be rude to yourself. That's what I want to just mention before we get started here, that, the times, it's really easy to feel like making all the plans go according to plan is the most important thing, and that is the mark of a man or a woman, because it applies to women as well. But I'm a man, so I'm kind of talking to the men here. Plus, I don't think there are any women who listen to this podcast aside from like my mother and my wife. So hi, thanks for listening. Things going according to plan, you might think, oh yeah, that's when I know I'll have made it. That's when I'll know I'm a real man, or when I'm not a slacker or a loser. Once I come up with a plan and things go according to it. But that's great when things go according to plan. But the true mark of a man is if he is willing to stand when things don't go according to plan and make use of what he has on hand. Especially if he is in a band and it's grand. I'm sorry, I had to make those rhyme. But the first part is what I meant to say, which is that the true test is when things don't go according to plan, because you might do everything right. You might do everything so that things should go according to plan, and then some monkey comes over and just throws a wrench in it, and then everything blows up, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Well, and hey, you could get down on yourself and beat yourself up about, oh man, I should have known that a monkey was going to come by and throw a wrench into my plan and mess it all up. That's why they're called monkey wrenches, by the way. And so I'm just stupid because I didn't think of that. Well, basically just don't do that, because that's not going to help anybody for the reasons I just previously said. And if you if you talk badly about yourself, then that will continue, essentially, and you don't want to do that. and that's part of it is when things go wrong and they don't go according to plan, and maybe it is all your fault, and absolutely you should take 100% responsibility for things not going according to plan, but part of that means not reacting badly to it, not beating yourself up about it, not getting mad at other people around you, not having a bad attitude. You can feel bad and you can be like, oh, I'm not happy that this thing happened. But that's a feeling, and that's okay to feel that. But then what are you going to do? What action are you going to take? And sometimes if you're like me, just not spiraling downward is a great action to take. Just not making the situation worse, and not kind of going down that negativity spiral slide into the pit of despair, because that's where that goes. Sometimes just not doing that is great, and that can be hard. That can be really hard. So, so I just want you to know that. So if you are thinking bad about yourself and talking bad about yourself because of things that you did or did not do, stop it, please, because that's not going to help you. It's not going to help anybody else. And also, next time things don't go according to plan, be like, okay, this is the real test now. The test has just begun. The test was not, can I plan things and have it go like I want it to? The test is, what am I going to do when things do not go as planned? Which brings us to today, because it is Tuesday, and so I had a bad Friday, and then weekend, and then the weekend you're always like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this on the weekend, but then you just kind of don't, because there's like other things that happen and stuff, and which is great. I had a great weekend, and a lot of times it's good to do things during the weekend that you wouldn't normally do during the week and all that stuff. And then Monday, you're trying to catch up on everything or trying to get going on stuff. And so it's hard to sit down and kind of do like a podcasty, talky kind of thing. So that brings us to Tuesday, and that's just how it goes. And, sometimes if that is a recurring thing where I'm like, I never, it's really hard to feel like doing a podcast on Friday, or it's hard to, that like it's not a good timing for it, then you should go, okay, well, maybe I need to like rethink my plan. Like maybe the problem was not really that it didn't go according to plan, but it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. It wouldn't go well. So I need to kind of rethink that part. So that may be kind of one of those areas where you can learn and improve in that way, or I can. Maybe I should do a midweek podcast. A Wednesday podcast. I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that was encouraging to you. So you want to, this is the main part that, so if you were going to skip to the main part of what I said, this is the part to skip to right now. So let's talk about the big picture. Drones, RC aircraft, are they the same thing? Are they not? They basically are. Toy drones, serious drones, stuff like that. So let's say you want to get into the world of RC aircraft. And so for me, I don't know much about helicopters and stuff. So that's kind of a separate thing. It's like the helicopters and I don't know, other specific like rubber band powered aircraft, or ultralights or something like that. Like that's niche stuff that I don't know much about. What I know about are FPV drones, or quadcopters, and RC airplanes. Like pretty much, the basic kind of RC airplanes. And there are some big differences between those two. So we'll get into that. So basically, and actually that's probably a good starting point. So typically, you usually either want to get into drones. I'm going to say drones, but I'm talking about quadcopters. It's those words are basically synonymous now. Maybe I'll try to say quadcopter. I don't know. Sometimes people don't know what you're talking about when you say quadcopter. But a quadcopter is a drone that has 4 motors. There you go, quad. And that's also confusing with people who do like, dirt bike stuff, riding, whatever, and they call a 4-wheeler a quad. And then also, if you're on a rowing team, apparently a boat with 4 people is also called a quad. And so people say quad, and I'm like, oh, drones, quads, and then like quadcopter, and then they're like, no, what are you talking about? Or I say the same thing, and they're like, what? A quad? How would a quad be flying in the sky? Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing there. So let's get back to it. So you have those are like, that's your biggest division, is you have like drones, and then you have RC aircraft. So the biggest difference is drones typically are a quadcopter. They have 4 motors, and they don't have wings. They don't have, fixed wings and a fuselage, meaning the body. So they don't have the structure of an aircraft that is needed for like flight, like how an airplane flies. And they fly very differently, obviously. Like, I think that part's pretty obvious. So you probably know which one you want to go with, because either you love how RC airplanes look when they're flying in the sky, and you want to do that. You want to control that thing and fly it around. They're much more visually appealing, and they're typically flown line of sight, for enjoyment purposes. FPV drones, so quadcopters, most commonly are FPV drones. So FPV stands for first person view, and really, in a way, that could apply to any drone that has a camera on it that you use to pilot the drone. So that would be like the DJI drones, the camera drones, photography drones. However, that term doesn't really apply, because what it has become, or what it started as, like originally, it's really for like racing drones. So originally, I'm pretty sure about the history on this. You had, like DIY quadcopters, people like cobbling these together. And then you had people going, hey, we can put a little analog camera on here. And then they're like, whoa, we can have a screen and like see what it's looking at. And then eventually it became goggles that you wear on your face. And so that became what an FPV drone is. And so primarily it is piloted just using the screen, and you are essentially in the drone because of the little camera that's mounted on there. And so that is how you are piloting it. And it has a very low latency, meaning there's very little delay between what the camera takes in and then sending that image to your goggles. So you're actually able to do very high-speed maneuvers, very precise, and that is the hallmark of an FPV drone. So typically, when we're talking about FPV drones, we're talking about manually piloted, high-performance drones, basically. And then what I would call kind of like normal drones or photography drones would be like your DJI drones. Now, I can't really say DJI drones because DJI makes drones that you can fly as an FPV kind of racing drone, or just an FPV drone, or you can technically put the goggles on your head. But anyway, so that's just to kind of give you a little bit more information about what people might be talking about when they say FPV. You can, of course, put a little camera on an airplane and fly that FPV as well. So that's why it's kind of like the FPV part, while it does mostly apply to quadcopters, it's kind of its own thing in a sense. So you have your camera and your video transmitting unit that sends that video feed to your goggles, and that's your FPV system, essentially. And there could be some variation there, or you might kind of mix it in with your flight controller to get more information and different stuff like that. So that is kind of the FPV aspect of it. And so typically people don't fly quadcopters line of sight, in the sense of line of sight. That means like you're looking at it and using your visuals. You're visually piloting the drone from where you're standing. And typically people don't do that with quadcopters nearly as much as airplanes, because sometimes they're just not as interesting to look at. And also it can be very difficult to maintain orientation, meaning to be able to tell which way the drone is pointing. Because with a quadcopter, if you don't have something to really distinguish, like if you don't have a big like fuselage or big body to distinguish which way is up and down and forwards and backwards, it can be difficult to learn that. Also, it's not as interesting seeing it in the air. Or at least I don't think so. I mean, it is fun to fly line of sight, but it's not nearly as neat as seeing an airplane kind of thing going through the air, and all that kind of stuff. So, and there's definitely more of a learning curve in that regard. So, let's say you want to get into RC airplanes. That's typically where people jump into. And we're going to get to drones and FPV quadcopters and stuff in a second. So RC airplanes, I start with that because that's the simplest that you can do, basically. So with that, you can, of course, buy a kit, and you can buy like a ready-to-fly kit. So a ready-to-fly kit would be the whole... Actually, well, sometimes it would be like a whole kit, like the transmitter, all the batteries you need, the airplane, and all that stuff. So like Horizon Hobby is a company that comes to mind that has a lot of those. And that could be a good route if you don't want to do any kind of building or anything like that. So I guess that's the second aspect that I should mention, really on both sides, is do you want to build your own, or do you want to just fly it? And you know, if you crash it, maybe you can repair it, or you'll just buy a new one, or send it back to the company. Maybe, I don't. Do people do that? I'm not sure. For me, I build a lot of stuff. Now, sometimes, especially in my aged years, I don't always want to be building everything. Sometimes I like to not be building. And I would say you shouldn't build as your very first airplane. So we'll get into that in a moment, or at least maybe not build from scratch. So anyway, so you've got airplanes. So the thing with airplanes is, so basically that whole system is going to be your airplane, which is going to include all the electronics in there to make it fly, the battery, which is typically going to be a lithium polymer battery, and then you've got your transmitter, and then of course whatever battery needs to power that, your transmitter, and then of course with the kind of in combination with the transmitter, you're going to have the receiver, which goes on your airplane, and that's how you actually control the airplane. And so the transmitter and the receiver, typically they need to be like the same brand, and which kind of also means that they will use the same like radio protocol to talk to each other. And so typically those are sold, or those can be sold kind of as a pair. But that is something that you want to keep in mind when you are buying an airplane or any kind of RC aircraft. You want to make sure that your receiver, if it comes with a receiver installed, make sure that it matches the transmitter that you're going to be using. Also, transmitter, radio, controller, those are all pretty much, I mean, they're used interchangeably. Those words are used interchangeably. So you have your airplane, your transmitter, your battery for the airplane. I guess maybe a propeller would be extra, or spare propellers is really what you want, because you're probably going to break the propellers. And what else? That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's basically it. And that's why getting into flying airplanes is so much simpler. Now, airplanes, the thing about airplanes is they can in some ways be more of a learning curve, because maybe you are not used to flying an airplane line of sight. Or maybe you need to learn like about how airplanes, like aerodynamics and stuff. So that comes into play as well, like the physical aerodynamics, the physical shape of the aircraft. Is it a fast aircraft, a slow aircraft? The wing can stall, which means your airplane is going to fall out of the sky. So there is a learning curve, of course, and you can learn some really great stuff and great principles just from the RC aircraft, and that's why it's such a great hobby. And then getting into a little bit more detail there, if you want to build your own aircraft, as far as the electronics, and so typically when I would say build an aircraft, it would be like a flight test style foam board kit. In fact, if you are interested in building from a kit, I would definitely check out the flight test kits, the foam board kits. And so like that was what I did as my first, what was it, my first airplane? Yeah, pretty much my first airplane. I got the tiny trainer kit with the power pack, and that means it has the motor, the servos. The servos are like the little motor arms that move the control surfaces. So like your ailerons, maybe flaps, ailerons, rudder, elevator, and it's gonna have your ESC, or your electronic speed controller, which connects to the motor. So basically you plug your battery into the ESC, and then you plug your motor into the ESC using little wire connectors. And then from the ESC, you'll plug into your receiver to power your receiver, and to be able to control your ESC, or to control your motor and all your servos. Your servos will plug into the receiver. So that's pretty much all you need for electronics for an RC airplane. What's cool about that, and also about the flight test stuff, is you can pretty easily swap out the electronics, or at least the motor and the ESC. So that way you can kind of interchange them pretty easily. So that in total, I mean, I would say, I don't know. Nowadays prices are, crazy sometimes. So, but I would say probably like $150. I would say you should be able to get into the RC airplane hobby for $150, and certainly you could do it for less if you found a good deal on stuff, or if you wanted to. Maybe if you wanted to source your own components. The flight test stuff is a little bit on the expensive side, but part of what you're paying for is making sure that you have all the components that you need, and it's less confusing. That's pretty much kind of what you'd be paying extra for. And then also just because I guess, the flight test name. So that's all it would take to get into the RC airplane side of things. And if you wanted to go with an FPV system, which we'll talk more about that because that applies more to the quadcopters, but it also, everything about the FPV system would pretty much apply to RC airplanes as well if you wanted to do an FPV airplane. So you would need probably the cheapest way to get into that, I'll just say, is a little all-in-one camera and video transmitter unit, and that's going to be like analog, and you can get those for anywhere from probably like $15 to $40, depending on kind of what you want, how powerful it is, the quality, and things like that. And more powerful is not always better, because sometimes more power can lead to more static. And then the goggles, I'm not up to date on how much the analog goggles cost, but you could get some box goggles for how much? $50? Probably like around $50 by now, like cheap box goggles. But I would expect to spend closer to $150 on decent box goggles, and that's analog. So we'll get into that in a second. So that's pretty much it for the airplane stuff. A lot easier to get into, a lot cheaper, because you have one motor, one ESC, you have some servos, and then your batteries are going to last longer. You're going to be able to fly for longer. And so that's yeah, but that's great, because then you can start getting creative. You can modify your aircraft. You can do attachments to it. You can, learn about center of balance and the CG, center of gravity, and how that affects flight and all that kind of cool stuff. So you can have a lot of fun with that. The downside is you do need more space for that. You need like an area to fly. So you need like a big backyard or a park. And it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more involved in that aspect, I guess you could say. And then, of course, the learning aspect as well. I should have said that probably in the first place, but if you are interested in getting into the RC stuff, definitely get a simulator and learn on that. I got what did I get? What simulator is it? I was just flying with the simulator. I'm looking it up right now. It was an airplane simulator that I had, and I was really enjoying it. Aerofly RC10, and I'm using that flight simulator for airplanes. The other big one is Real Flight, and that's REAL flight. And I'm not using that because you can't get it on a Mac. So shame on you, Real Flight, because I use a Mac. And but you can use the Aerofly RC10 RC flight simulator. That's what I'm using on here, and it's fantastic. Like, simulators are fantastic. So you can plug your transmitter or your radio, your controller, plug it into your computer, and then use it for the simulator. Okay, and let's talk about quads now. So quads, here's the thing. What's kind of cool about it is all of this information applies from the tiniest of quads, which would be like a tiny whoop. That would be a name for those really, really small ones with like I don't know, 1.5 inch propellers, like very, very small, all the way up to, I don't know, X-class racing drones or heavy lift drones. Obviously, there's going to be some differences and some variations, but the principles are pretty much the same. So with FPV drones, you could go, like I said, anywhere from a tiny whoop. That's like your indoor, indoor flyer. It's going to fit in the palm of your hand, basically. So it's going to be very, very small. And then moving on up, and we size the drones according to the size of the propeller. So a 5-inch drone, and that's kind of one of the most common, or at least has been. That means that the size of the propeller diameter is 5 inches. So a 2-inch drone, that means it uses a 2-inch diameter propeller. And that's just kind of how we size it. So it doesn't necessarily mean the size of the actual frame or the body of the drone. It just means kind of the size of the propeller that it spins. And that can kind of tell you a lot, because the bigger propeller you have, the bigger motor you have, which means you need bigger ESCs, et cetera, et cetera. So with, let me get a little sip here. Let's take a little sip break. Oh yeah, it's the best stuff. Lavazza. That's the best coffee in the world. I'll tell you what. So with drones, things get expensive, and that's pretty much the biggest difference. Is it's much more expensive, especially the upfront cost. And it gets a bit more involved, more complicated. So with airplanes, a lot of it is very physical. You can kind of see the physical flight control surfaces move. You know, if the ailerons in the wing move this much, the airplane is going to roll this much. Well, with drones, it gets much more software-based, computer-based. And it can be very confusing and like a whole lot of learning curve when you're first jumping into it. So especially if you're building. So from the aspect of like, hey, that looks really cool, I just want to jump into this and fly these FPV drones. I really think that you're going to be better off if you buy a ready to fly kit right away. So what I would recommend would be something like the Beta FPV. I just got it because they sent it to me to review. It's the Beta FPV Cetus X. I believe it's the Cetus X. But check out Beta FPV because they make some good little tiny whoop sized drones. And this one, in this case, it was like an all-in-one, ready to fly set. So it had the transmitter, it had the goggles, it had the batteries, it had the charger for the batteries. It had some spare propellers. It had the drone, of course. And this drone is it's like indoor outdoor size drone, the Cetus X. And they have some different sizes as well. And a lot of times with the small ones, just so you're not confused, they'll size the propellers in millimeters. So I'm not totally sure why. But a lot of times they'll say this is a 95 millimeter or 80 85 or that kind of thing. So I would definitely start out with getting something that's like an indoor FPV drone, or maybe you could fly it outside like on a calm day. And the reason why is because That way, it takes away all of the hassle and frustration and the confusion of the learning curve of figuring out how all these things go together. Because that way you're going to have your transmitter. Well, you don't have to think about which transmitter should I get? Which goggles should I get? Are they compatible? Is this going to work with that? What about this drone? Are these batteries too big? What does high voltage mean? Does it have to be high voltage? What kind of connector is this? What? So there's like a lot of things that need to work together for like the whole FPV drone system to function. So that's why it's much better to get something where you can open up the case, charge the batteries, plug in, follow the basic instructions, and then fly it and just have fun and get hooked on flying your FPV drone. Again, simulators. Definitely get yourself an FPV drone simulator. And if you do buy your transmitter, your controller separately, you can just plug that into your computer and then be flying and practice flying even before you buy your first drone, which is really cool. And I think you can also use like an Xbox or PlayStation controller as well. But I don't have those, so I haven't tried that. But I know a lot of other people have. And I think you can modify typically it would be your left joystick on there to, like, you could remove the spring, because with typical RC transmitters or controllers, the left joystick is not spring loaded to center. So it'll stay wherever you set it, because that is your throttle. They call that mode 2 configuration. And so that's where that would stay. So that would be the difference. And then that's also a difference between like your camera drones and stuff, is that the throttle on like a DJI camera drone is going to be centered, because typically you want to just sit there and hover, and so it makes more sense for it to just be centered and then nothing happens. Okay, that was a little side note. So a simulator. Get a simulator. I think I have like almost all of them. Orca FPV Skydive. That is a free simulator, and it's really good for a free simulator. It's not great, but it's very good for a free simulator. What is this? FPV Skydive. Is that the same thing? Why do I have it on my computer twice? I don't know. Liftoff. Liftoff is another really big one. That's a heavy, that's going to take up like 15 gigabytes or something on your computer, and it can be quite taxing. I mean, I have a nice computer, and really I turn the graphics almost all the way down, because I want the performance. I want it to be as accurate as possible with the physics and everything, and I don't really care about the graphics. Trip FPV, TRYP, that is another good simulator. That one, what's the difference between those? How would I explain that? I don't know. It's just different. And then some of these feel better or feel worse, so they feel more like the drone that you fly. So it can be like, I guess based on the physics engine that it's using or something, it can make a difference. But even a really like cheap simulator like the Orca FPV Skydive simulator, that'll still help you build that muscle memory. That's really going to help you when you actually start flying, and you'll understand the basic concepts of like how to fly an FPV drone, and what that feels like and all that stuff. I have a series on how to fly FPV drones in case you're interested. It is, a couple years old, but everything really still applies. It just might be a little bit different in the simulator itself. So you can check that out. I think that's like the FPV, what do I call that? The crash course, or learn to fly FPV drones, or something like that. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel. Okay, and then Drone Racing League Simulator, that's another one. Uncrashed FPV Drone Simulator, that's another really good one. I think Uncrashed, that might be my favorite right now. Uncrashed. I want to say it's, yeah, and they get really good to where you can like, it really mimics real life very nicely, with the physics, but also like just the behavior of the quad and what it looks like and all that kind of stuff, and battery performance and stuff. Very cool. So those are some options for you. Go check those out. Find one that's in your budget and that can run on your computer. and start using that. And so the difference, I probably should have talked about this part first, but I have a video also of talking about the difference between FPV drones, how I explained them, and camera drones or normal drones. And so you should check that out if you're trying to decide, like, I don't know, I kind of want a DJI camera drone, but I also like want to be able to rip around. Well, they're very different. Like one is for, how would I put that? One is, I guess they're both enjoyable, but one's way more enjoyable. And that would be the FPV drones. They're way more enjoyable because you are the pilot in command and you are like flying it around like you're some kind of freaking pod racer or something. So it's that's super cool. But anyway, just to say that that's probably the difference. That would be the biggest choice that you would need to make in the first place of, okay, drones, what kind of drone do I want to go with? Like that's your biggest fork in the road right there in between the camera drones and the FPV drones. So totally like different aspects. I like to use the analogy of like one is like a, I don't know, like a Tesla or like a luxury car, and the other one is like a, I don't know, a street racer or like a dirt bike or something. And the dirt bike is the FPV drones. So we talked about the smallest drones and why I think that you should get into FPV drones through that in that way. And then as you go up, there's you really, I mean, you could do all kinds of different sizes of drones, but you could go with like a 2-inch or a 2.5-inch drone. Again, that's the propeller size. That's how we measure them. You could do a 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5. I mean, there's like a lot. 5-inch is the most common and has been the most common. But I'm not sure if that is going to stay the case, because as motor technology changes, we're seeing that we're getting really good performance out of like 3.5-inch propeller drones. And then there's also like regulations and different aspects like that, which may affect things, or could affect things for you in your area, or if you're choosing to follow regulations or not. In the sense of the weight, perhaps the weight of the drone. And it could also just be a performance aspect as well. So like typically the larger the propeller, the longer that you can either you can fly for longer or you can fly faster. And that's kind of depending on how you are flying or how it's set up. So larger propellers can be much more efficient, and they can also be much faster. So if you need to chase a really fast moving subject, then you probably want to go with a larger size drone, especially if you are going to have a larger payload, like a camera. So if you're going to have a GoPro or larger camera on your drone, plus you need a big battery for endurance, then you're going to need to like start going bigger, like 6 or 7 or 8-inch or maybe even 10-inch propeller size. I don't have any drones that are that large yet, but maybe someday I will in the future. And otherwise, though, here's the thing: is so you'll hear a lot about sub 250 drones. What that means is under 250 grams, or at or under 250 grams weight of the drone, and that's all up weight, meaning or takeoff weight, so the weight of the drone with the battery while it's flying in the air. A big part of that is because of the FAA regulations in where they kind of just picked an arbitrary amount, which was 250 grams, and said, hey, if it's 250 grams, these rules apply. If it's under 250 grams, then these different set of rules apply. We're not going to go into all that because it gets kind of confusing, but in a lot of times, like in a lot of ways, it's not even applicable, or it won't even matter. It could matter, but I don't want to get into like regulations and stuff right now, because here's the real deal. The deal is like, if you are being smart and respectful and responsible with whatever thing you're playing with, it probably won't be a problem. Okay. Especially if you're like out in the middle of nowhere or not even in the middle of nowhere, if you're just out away from, aircraft flight paths and airports and things like that, where there would be an issue, potential issue in terms of like aircraft airspace and stuff like that, then you probably won't run into any problems. So, that's my eyes twitching. That's weird. That's okay. So anyway, but you will hear that term, sub 250 or 250 grams. You'll hear that term. And so the thing is, though, that's not all bad, like in terms of having that kind of weight requirement, if you will. And the reason why, the positive side of that is companies and people are being very innovative and being able to adapt the drone, so the weight of the drone, and make it more efficient, or cameras are getting smaller and weighing less. So that can be really good too, because that means that you can either fly for longer, like a lot of like ultralight sub 250 long range drones they're essentially made more for cruising as opposed to like ripping around. Those can be what am I trying to say? Those can be a good choice for a beginner as well. Not necessarily like the long range ultralight builds, but in the sense of smaller drones that fit under the sub 250 amount. And the reason why they can be better is because the lighter the drone is, the less likely it is to break when you crash it into something. So carbon fiber is really durable. That's typically what the frames are made out of. And if you have really lightweight components on that durable frame, you're much less likely to break it in a crash. Also, typically, if you're under the sub 250 amount, your propeller size is going to be smaller, which means your motor size is going to be smaller, and your battery requirements are going to be smaller as well. And so what all that kind of means is it actually is less expensive to get into it and to operate it, meaning like buying more batteries, pretty much, buying more propellers, more batteries, stuff like that, or if you have to replace parts. So because the batteries, that's a big thing. Like that's going to be probably one of your biggest expenses, getting into the FPV drone, or I guess any quadcopter category. And again, these are lithium polymer batteries typically, although lithium ion is becoming much more popular and the chemistry is getting better. And that's really cool because the chemistry in these batteries is getting better every day. And so, anyway, I guess what I'm really trying to say here is if you are wanting to build your next drone, or you're wanting to get into it, or maybe you want to buy a drone, right off the bat that is much more capable. You can do some freestyle stuff. You can kind of rip around outside. It's not so sensitive to wind. I would say anything from like probably like a 2.5 inch to 3.5 inch size would be a great option for the reasons that I just mentioned. You're going to not be spending as much in batteries, and it's, again, especially since if it's your first drone, you're going to crash it a lot. Like, it's okay. That's part of it. You're just going to crash it. And so you're probably going to be pretty abusive to the batteries. And so it's going to be a lot better if you're spending, I don't know, anywhere from $10 to $20 on a battery, as opposed to like, $20 to $40 per battery if you're running like a 5-inch drone with a 6S 1800 milliamp hour battery or something with like a 150 C rating. And if what I just said made no sense, that's what I'm talking about. It's like all these numbers and meanings and acronyms and stuff that you have to like learn, or you don't have to learn, but like you will learn, and it's helpful when you learn them as you go. But anyway, so I guess that's what I'm trying to say is something like a 2.5 inch, maybe like maybe like the Emax. Oh, not the Tiny Hawk, but I can't think of what it is now. Anyway, there are a lot of companies out there that make these size of drones. So again, anywhere from like 2.5 inch to 3.5 inch propeller size, I think would be a great starting point. And then, because everything that you learn from like a tiny whoop, little thing that you can fly indoors, will apply to a larger aircraft. So yeah, I feel like this was supposed to be like a kind of a big picture, but then we kind of got like into the weeds because I just can't help it. Because I feel like once you get started down this path, you're going to immediately come across acronyms and sayings and things and be like, what the heck is he talking about? But again, that's why I say just go with like a full kit as your first thing. Full kit. As you go with it as your first drone, you should probably just do like a full drone kit, so you're like ready to go. What else? Okay, so that's FPV drones. Okay, so let's talk about, this is the next big thing that's going to come up, whether you're doing FPV drones or FPV airplanes or whatever, is the FPV system, the first person view system. So it consists of 3 parts, but kind of just 2 parts. So you need your camera that sits in the front of the drone. You need your video transmitter, which takes that image from the camera and then sends it to your goggles. And that's the third thing you need. You need your goggles. So your goggles are going to receive the video feed. Right now, there are, I think, 3. I haven't super researched this, but I think there are like 3 options, maybe 4. 3 options for your video feed. You can go with analog. That's kind of old school. That's the cheapest, most accessible way to do it. It can be very, very inexpensive, or it can be just as expensive as the other methods, depending on like the level of quality that you want to get from it. Analog video it basically looks like old TV footage, or old video footage from like broadcast footage from the 80s or 90s, probably 80s actually. But again, the quality depends on like kind of how much you want to spend on the gear. So it is not good image quality, and it will one of the biggest differences is like when you get breakup on that, you will get static. So like remember how like your TVs, they used to get static if there was interference, but now with TVs, because it's digital, they'll just like freeze, or they'll get all pixelated and weird. So that is, if you're kind of just getting your feet wet into this, you probably want to go with excuse me, you probably want to go with analog. And that is most likely what will be included in like a ready to fly beginner kit. Because when you go up to digital, then you're looking at, so the biggest player in digital is DJI. So DJI, they make the camera drones and a lot of other camera stuff and all kinds of things, really. They make microphones and cameras and gimbals and all sorts of stuff. But they also make digital FPV systems. And so that's, I mean, they're probably one of the most popular. That's what I use. So I use kind of the older style goggles because it's like more compatible with other things and stuff. Too much detail. Sorry. So DJI, that's one option. However, it's expensive, but it's really good stuff. It's pretty much like cutting edge FPV stuff, but it's expensive. So like the latest, or maybe not the latest, the O3 air unit. So in fact, I just saw a thing right now. Oh, so that's getting phased out apparently. I was just looking at Get FPV and it just popped up. So I think you can get them for $179 now on Get FPV, the O3 air unit, but it used to be like $250 or something like that. What's cool about those and with the digital stuff is you can get really good quality, like I think 1080p quality sent to your goggles. So like night and day difference from the analog, and you can record as well. So you can record like with the O3 air unit, you can record up to 4K. Now that doesn't mean it's going to look as good as a GoPro, or that it's going to look as good as your, your Lumix or your Sony or whatever. But because how things get, the way that they advertise for like, 4K stuff, there's a lot of 4K stuff that looks like trash, because even like toy drones will advertise 4K, and like, well, I guess they're just straight up lying. But anyway, the cool thing about it is that you can record the DVR, or I guess DVR is digital video recording. So whatever, but it on board, you can basically get really good onboard video quality. So you wouldn't necessarily need to strap a GoPro onto it or some other kind of external camera, depending on what you're doing. If you want the best quality, then yeah, you should probably put an external camera of some kind. But you still can do a lot with the O3 Air unit as it comes. So again, but expect to pay anywhere from, I guess, $180 to probably, for the latest and greatest from DJI, probably about $250 per air unit. So that's going to be your camera and your transmitter. So that all that part goes on your drone. And remember, this is the thing that you're flying around in the air at 50 miles an hour, skimming past trees and rocks, meaning there's always a good chance that you're going to break it. So you have to keep that in mind with your investment. And then the goggles are going to be, how much are the goggles now? I don't know. I'm going to say like anywhere from like $300 to $600. Is that right? That sounds right. Maybe more, maybe 800. It also depends on if you get like upgraded antennas and things like that. So I would say, okay, so let's say like, I probably should have done it this way. With analog video, you can probably get into that and have like an analog package for like $100, maybe $150. And that's with your camera, your video transmitter, and your goggles. With DJI, it's probably going to be about $1,000. And then there's another option, which is, it's digital, but it is it's not DJI. It's called what is it? Walk Snail. I'm trying to pull this up on my computer so you can see it. Walk Snail is what this is. So I think you can see that now. So I just pulled this up. This popped up on Get FPV. This is the Walk Snail Avatar GT kit. Is this the one with the night vision? Cutting edge technology performance. Sony Stars. Okay, so yeah, low light operation. So this is kind of more specialized. But the point is, there's another type of FPV, digital FPV called Walk Snail, which is a weird name. I don't know who came up with that. I'm not totally sure what's up with that, to be honest with you. But that is what it's called. I'm just gonna get off of the Get FPV website because I'm gonna get distracted. But the point there is, you have another version of digital, but it's better than analog, but it's not as good as DJI. However, like a lot of things, DJI, they have their whole ecosystem. It's very locked down. It's hard to I don't know. It's hard to integrate things sometimes or make modifications. The Walk Snail is supposed to be much more like open source. So you have a lot more manufacturers making accessories and aftermarket parts and pieces and things for it. So that brings the price down a lot. And that is actually something that it is interesting to me, but I haven't actually checked that out yet because I've had the DJI digital stuff, and so I'm kind of like, well, that's what I'm rolling with right now, and it's working out really well. And like I said, the O3 Air units, it's good stuff. It is good stuff. So that's a kind of a brief, maybe not so brief, but that's kind of an overview on the FPV side of things, the FPV system. And then so again with the goggles, like with the Walk Snail, you're probably maybe half of DJI. I'm actually not totally sure, but that sounds pretty good because you have analog at the very bottom, And again, it depends on the quality level that you want, because there are definitely analog goggles that cost $500, but they're like a lot better. At least so I'm told. I haven't bought any of those. But you've got the very low end, $0 to $200 analog, let's say, and then like 0 to what 500, not 0, 400 to $800. You have walk snail, and then you've got DJI from like 800 to 1200. Something like that. I'm just kind of making up numbers so that that sounds nice, but I think you get what I'm saying there. So that's something. And again, this is something that if you're building your own drone, you kind of need to like think through all this stuff, because your video system, that's what you're going to be using on all of your drones. So if you build another drone, because you can't really swap components on drones very easily. If you're building another drone, then you're going to need a second everything. You're going to need another set of motors, 4 motors. This is kind of getting into one of the differences about drones is the cost. Drones versus RC airplanes, you have a lot of cost with drones because you have 4 motors. You have your video system for each drone. You're going to have, of course, a receiver in each drone as well. You're going to have your stack, which consists of your flight controller board and then your ESC board, your 4-in-1 ESC board. So it's not just one ESC, you've got 4 ESC for each motor, or 1 for each motor. So that raises the cost as well. And then you've got, of course, your carbon fiber frame to kind of hold it all together. And then propellers. But propellers are like pretty much the same. Same right there. And, of course, the prices in all these things vary wildly. So if you go for like a budget option, it could cost a quarter as much as a premium option. And you could, just like for, giggles and funsies, you could absolutely get as much enjoyment out of a budget option that costs very little, like a, I don't know, $150 FPV drone, like a 5-inch. That's the thing is sometimes the cost is not that. It's not as different as you would think. Oh, also, if you're wondering, well, I want to, maybe I should build my own FPV drone because it's gonna cost less than than if I buy like a kit or something like that. Well, I don't recommend doing that. I don't recommend thinking of it like that, because you might be able to buy the components more cheaply. Maybe it's kind of hard to say, but most likely you won't actually come out ahead in the long run if you're just trying to do it from like a cost perspective, because if you're doing it yourself, well, it's going to take a lot longer. So it's going to be a lot of time. So basically, if you want to build your own FPV drone, do it because you want to build your own drone. Don't do it because it's going to be cheaper or something, because it's just going to be frustrating, because there are so many things that go into building a drone, which can be very fun and rewarding and really good skills and lessons to learn. But if that's not your motivation, you're probably just going to be frustrated by it. So that's why I say it's not cheaper to build your own drone. Well, it's not always, wait, what am I saying? It's not better. Don't do it to try to save money, but also you probably won't save money, because a lot of these companies, they buy, thousands of these motors at a time. They buy them at bulk, and then they assemble all these cheap components onto a cheap drone. And so you could potentially just have more fun with a cheap drone and, kind of save in that way, as opposed to trying to buy cheap components and putting them all together yourself. So there's that. Well, it looks like we're coming up right on close to an hour now, so I think that's a good place to wrap it up. We talked a lot about the big picture. I know we did talk about camera drones. So we talked about the big picture, but we did kind of focus more on the RC aircraft and FPV drones, because like I said, that's more of the fun side of things, and that's probably more of what I know about. I do know about, obviously, the DJI in camera drones, but the thing about that is it's so different that really what you end up talking about, and what you should be talking about, is like camera stuff, the camera stuff and video stuff. So it's not about the drone with those DJI camera drones and drones like that. It's not about the drone. It's not about the flight performance. It's really more about like the image. You're capturing the image. You're capturing the action, and it's sort of irrelevant, like what kind of motors it has, or if it can go really fast, depending on the type of subject that you're trying to capture. But the point there, I think you got enough information to kind of tell, like, okay, I want to go either in this direction or that direction or something like that. Wow, that thunder is really starting to get close, so I better wrap it up. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. And it's been good hanging out with you. And yeah, so please leave me comments. Leave me comments, questions down below. And if you see somebody else has a question and you can answer that, please do so. Which is fantastic. And that's another really cool thing about the FPV community, is everybody's super helpful. Like, that is pretty much what you hear most of the time. And the RC aircraft stuff, especially like the foam board type of stuff, because everybody's very creative. Everybody is, doing it because they want to be doing it. And so they'll help you, help you figure stuff out. And, it's typically a very welcoming experience. So welcome to the RC hobby. Fantastic. And remember, if things don't go according to plan, that is when the real test starts. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Get out there, fly something, be creative, stay healthy, and do cool stuff. And I will see you again, or talk to you again, very soon. Did I stop the recording? I didn't stop it. Stop it. There we go. Okay, now we're stopping for real. Bye-bye. Have a good day.